They say time heals everything. I disagree. Time doesn't heal, it covers. Like fine dust settling over old furniture, it only hides what's there, waiting to be swept clean, revisited, faced again. At 78, I've become an expert at covering. My name is Henry Wallace, but no one calls me that anymore. I'm Mr. Hank, the old man who shows up at the barber shop on Wednesdays and always brings the same change for the newsstand on Fridays. I've lived in the same house for over 50 years, and if you ask the mailman, he'll tell you I'm a quiet man with a steady routine, distant eyes, and few words. And he'd be right, but only partly. What no one knows is that inside me lives a battlefield that was never decommissioned. While the town sees me as a respectable old man with an honorable past, I carry ghosts. And I don't mean vague memories or generic traumas. I'm talking about names, dates, decisions that haunt me with the precision of a military clock. For decades, I built a life on silence. I married, had a son, worked hard, paid my bills. But every night, every single one, I go back to that moment. That exact minute when a choice made under orders, under fear, under doubt, changed the course of two lives. One that went on, mine, and one that was lost, his. For a long time, I convinced myself I'd done the right thing, that I'd fulfilled my duty, that the circumstances justified what I never had the courage to explain. But the truth is, I haven't slept whole since then. No medal or folded flag can make up for the absence of what was left unsaid. My son grew up looking at me with admiration, unaware that his old man was, at best, an honest coward. The woman, who slept by my side for 42 years, loved me steadfastly, but always knew there was a part of me she couldn't reach, a locked compartment that even she, with all her patience, couldn't open. And now she's gone. The boy drifted away, and I'm still here, alone with the letter I never wrote, the truth I never told. Yesterday, when I opened the newspaper and saw Carter's name in the obituaries, I felt the world shake in a way I hadn't since the explosion of the first helicopter. He's dead, and I'm still here. And that's the injustice, because I was the one who failed, and he was the one who paid the price. I sat with that newspaper in my hands for a long time. The coffee cup went cold, and I didn't even notice. His picture in the bottom corner stared at me as if it had been taken yesterday, though the years had hardened his features and whitened his hair. Carter Miller, my patrol partner, my friend, the man who trusted me until the last second. I never knew what really happened that night. I told everyone he wandered off in the dark, that I lost sight of him when we were surrounded, that I came back because I thought he'd already fallen. And all of that was almost true. But almost doesn't cut it when it comes to conscience. What no one knows, what I hid even from the doctors when they came with their post-trauma evaluation forms, is that I hesitated. I had the chance to go back for him, to shout, to try. But fear, that damned fear paralyzed me. And when I came to my senses, the helicopter was already in the air, and he stayed behind. God only knows for how long. Since then, I've never spoken his name aloud, never answered his mother's letters, never forgave myself. I tried to fill the void with work, with religion, with showing up at my son's birthdays. But Carter's gaze never left me. It appeared when I closed my eyes, when the radio played a distant siren, when someone spoke of honor as if it were an easy title to wear. Over time, the memories grew quieter, but they never left. I always knew there was something I needed to do, a letter, an explanation. Not for the world, not to polish my image or ease my guilt in front of those who've never seen the desert from the inside, but for someone, for his son maybe, or mine, for anyone willing to understand that a uniform doesn't guarantee heroism, that sometimes the most decorated man is also the most broken inside. That night, After reading the obituary for the 5th time, I went to the study and opened the drawer I'd kept locked for years. Inside, alongside the medals and enlistment, papers, was a stack of yellowed pages with unfinished notes, fragments of a confession I always choked on. I took a deep breath, pulled up the chair, and sat down. And for the first time in over 4 decades, I started writing not as a soldier, but as a man. I wrote with an honesty that ached in my bones. Every word I put on the page seemed to pull a buried memory, a frozen gesture, a guilt that slept beneath the calm exterior of the man I'd become. There was no poetry in that letter. There was truth, raw, unadorned, unflinching. I started with his name, as if he were sitting in front of me, alive, whole. Carter. I couldn't call him anything else. That's what he called me in the trenches, between low jokes, shared cigarettes, and the silences only those who've seen death up close understand. I told everything. I told about the exact moment I heard the distress call on the radio, about the hesitation that froze me for seconds, seconds that cost a life. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't edit. I didn't cast myself as a victim of circumstance or try to polish the uniform. I wrote as a man who was afraid, and because of that, failed. I also wrote about the return, the vomit that came up still inside the helicopter. The commander's face, who didn't ask anything but never looked at me the same way again. I wrote about how I crafted an acceptable version, a narrative that seemed honorable, that justified my solitary return and cloaked in merit what was, in truth, cowardice. And more than that, I wrote about my life afterward, about the woman I loved but never fully let in, about the son who grew up admiring a version of me I didn't believe in myself. I wrote about my silence, the nightmares, the locked drawer where I kept not just the medal they gave me, but also the shame I could never confess. The letter filled with everything that had eaten away at me from the inside, and when I finished, the paper felt heavy in my hands, as if it carried decades of compressed truth. I signed it with the steady hand I still had. Henk. Just that. No military title, no dramatic plea. Just the name of a tired man who for the first time was honest. I sealed the envelope slowly, as if each movement were part of a ritual. And when I dropped that piece of paper into the mailbox, I didn't feel relief, or fear, or expectation. I felt empty, a different kind of empty, not the emptiness of guilt, but the space left by it as it began to slip away. I walked back home with my shoulders less hunched. The world was the same, the quiet street, the dirty cup in the sink, the radio playing songs that no longer meant anything. But inside me, something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, the silence felt lighter. Not because the war was over, but because, at last, I stopped pretending. It had ended inside me. It came 4 days later. I didn't know at first, of course. There was no immediate reply, no phone call, no knock at the door. Just silence. But a different kind. A silence that seemed to be waiting for something. It was as if the world were holding its breath, about to respond. I spent more time by the window, something I'd never done before. I watched the mailman, even when I wasn't expecting mail. I paid attention to the phone like someone hearing a distant song. And then, on the 5th day, while I was slowly chopping wood in the backyard, I saw a pickup truck stop in front of the house. A man got out, younger than I expected. His eyes carried the same color as Carter's when he handed me the last cigarette of the night, that shade between brown and suspicion. I knew instantly. It was his son. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me. I dropped the axe without realizing it and walked silently to the gate. For a few seconds, there was no movement. Just the sound of the wind and the uneasy noise the past makes when it finally takes shape. Then he raised his hand and showed the envelope, my envelope, folded but still intact. "Did you write this?" His voice steady but with cracks at the edges. I could only nod. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. He just took a deep breath and said, "My father talked about you once. He said if I ever met Hank Wallace, I should listen, just listen." And in that moment, I knew that letter hadn't been sent by chance. It wasn't just read, it was felt. I invited him in, made coffee, even with trembling hands, sat in the same chair where I'd spent countless nights wondering what this moment would be like. He spoke little, but he listened to everything. I told the story again, not to repeat the letter, but because I needed those words to come out of my mouth. And when I finished, when the last word fell between us like a nail on a hollow wooden floor, he did something I never expected. He extended his hand and said, "Now I understand why my father forgave you even before he knew the truth." In the days that followed, the world around me didn't change, but inside, something began to quietly rearrange itself. Carter's son's visit was like a stone thrown into a still lake. The ripples took time to reach the shore, but when they did, they brought something I hadn't felt in a long time. Movement. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an imposter sitting in my own story. I didn't feel smaller than the uniform I once wore, nor bigger than the guilt I carried. I just felt human. As if that conversation had given me back the right to breathe again without the weight of owing the world an explanation. And it was in this state of emotional suspension that another surprise came, not by letter, not by phone, but in the form of a voice. It was a gray morning, like so many others, and I was walking to the mailbox expecting nothing. When I turned back, hands empty, and thoughts still caught in the previous night, I heard my name from the gate. Not Mr. Hank, not veteran, Wallace, just Hank. A female voice, firm, familiar, like the echo of an old page rising to the surface. I looked, and there she was, Evelyn Monroe, the woman I'd cried for quietly over the years, never quite knowing what hurt more. Letting her go or never telling her why I left first. She was my fiancée before the war, before Carter, before everything. And when I came back, broken and full of stories I couldn't tell, I was the one who pushed away the two arms that still wanted to hold me. And now, after all this time, there she was, silver hair tied in an elegant bun, eyes still sharp as a blade, but soft as rain after summer. She said she'd heard about the letter, that Carter's son had come to her, and that, hearing what I'd written, something inside her stirred. "You don't owe me anything, Hank, but if you want, I can still listen." We went inside, sat like old acquaintances, not because time had erased the pain, but because it no longer blocked the conversation. Telling her what I'd never said was like turning the key in a door that had always been ajar. I didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for promises. We just looked at each other for a long moment and understood something without saying it. Sometimes, life just needs a second chance to finish what it started the right way. And in that instant, I realized the letter wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something I never knew if I deserved, but that was now, at last, finding me. From that reunion with Evelyn, something inside me began to rearrange itself more deeply than any change I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the relief of having told the truth, but the realization that even after all this time, I was still capable of being seen, not as the symbol others had built, but as the man I truly was. And the most astonishing thing was realizing that, despite everything I'd left behind, there was still room to be forgiven. Evelyn didn't treat me like a repentant man on the edge of the end. She treated me like someone who still had time. And maybe, just maybe, that was true. In the days that followed, the movement began, quiet but steady. Carter's son came back, this time with his wife and 2 grandchildren. He brought an old black and white photo of us at a makeshift camp, smiling amidst dust and fear. He asked me to explain each face, each detail, as if trying to piece together a puzzle left as an inheritance. Then some neighbors started greeting me differently. Not with that automatic reverence for being the veteran, but with a restrained curiosity, a new respect, as if they'd heard something, read a piece of that letter, or caught whispers of who I really was. The letter, somehow, was taking on a life of its own. It was read, discussed, shared among people who might never imagine what lay behind my facade of silence. And it was during this time that my son reached out. He came into the house unannounced, like he did when he was a boy, and sat in the same armchair he used to claim at Christmas as a child. "I got a copy of the letter, Dad. Your friend's son sent it to me." For a moment, I feared he was there to confront, to question the father figure that, unknowingly, had been built on omissions. But no. He just took a deep breath and said, "Now I understand why you were so quiet, why you never wanted to talk about the war." And then he looked me in the eyes with an expression that mixed pain, relief, and understanding, and added, "I wish I'd known sooner, but I'm still here." That broke me in a gentle way. For the first time, I felt my silence had been pierced, not by rejection, but by listening. That night I slept with the window open. For the first time in decades, I let the breeze in without fear it would bring voices from the past, because for the first time, I felt it could also bring a bit of peace. The mornings started to dawn more slowly, and for the first time in years, I let them envelop me without urgency. I still woke early, but it wasn't out of military habit or stubborn insomnia. It was because I wanted to see the day begin. Every detail seemed new, as if everything around me had subtly changed color. The sound of the kettle, the smell of bread warming in the oven, even the creaks of the old wooden porch. Everything had a different weight. More real, lighter. It was strange to feel this way at 78, as if I were experiencing something for the first time, but at the same time, it made sense. The letter I wrote didn't just open doors in the world out there. It opened space inside me. A space that had been blocked for so long, I'd forgotten what it was like to breathe deeply without feeling I owed someone an explanation. I started organizing things with a care I hadn't had before. Not because I sensed the end approaching, but because suddenly it made sense to put everything in its right place. I went back to the photo albums forgotten in the back of the closet, revisited old letters from my wife, looked over the war, items I'd once hidden in a drawer like evidence of a crime, and for the first time, I didn't feel shame touching them, because now they had context. Now they belonged to a story that was finally being told as it needed to be. A complete story, with mistakes, yes, but also with redemption. Not the movie, kind with applause or medals, but the kind that comes from the peace of looking in the mirror and recognizing yourself whole. Evelyn started spending more time with me. We didn't rekindle anything that felt like a late romantic restart. What we had now was more precious than that. A presence that didn't demand. There were afternoons when she just sat beside me with a book, and I with my thoughts. Other times, we walked down the main street like 2 old friends who'd survived many things, including themselves. When she smiled, it was as if she were saying, "We're still here." And that was all I needed to hear. Life didn't change radically. It was still made of silences, knee pains, tough news on the TV. But something essential had changed inside, me. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that what I'd leave behind wouldn't just be an empty chair and some black and white photos, but a legacy of truth, of late courage, of possible love. Because in the end, it's never too late to write the letter you should have sent. A few weeks later, something happened I could never have predicted. The letter I wrote, that I thought was just a final outpouring, a silent confession between two names from the past, ended up in the hands of a local journalist. Not out of vanity or a quest for recognition. It was Carter's son who took it to him. He said he thought others needed to read it, that maybe it would help other veterans break their own silences. At first, I'll admit, I felt a quiet panic, as if they were peeling off a layer of my skin that was only just starting to heal. But deep down, I also felt something like acceptance, because I knew there was nothing left to hide. And when the article came out in a simple Sunday supplement titled "The Letter That Couldn't Wait Any Longer," something in me finally let go. In the days following the publication, I started getting small visits. Sometimes they were men I'd never seen, wearing caps from old military divisions, with deep eyes and quiet hands. One of them cried silently at my gate, hugged me tightly, and left without saying his name. Others left notes saying they, too, had letters they'd never written. Widows came to thank me, not for answers, but for words that opened doors inside them that had been locked since the 70s. And then something even more unexpected. I was invited to speak at a school. A teacher, the granddaughter of a veteran, said the students were reading the letter as part of a project on memories never spoken aloud. I went. Not as a hero, but as a witness. There, in front of kids who can't even imagine the weight of a war, I told my story without embellishment. I spoke of fear, of failure, of guilt, of the letter. And when I finished, a skinny boy with freckles raised his hand and asked, "Do you think it was worth writing it?" I took a moment to answer. I looked at the open windows of the classroom, at the attentive faces, at the teacher with teary eyes. And then I said, it was. Because writing didn't change the past, but it gave me a new present, and now, who knows, a different future for someone like you. The last few months passed like a long, gentle season, like the end of a winter that never promised spring, but still brought flowers. The house, once a refuge of comfortable solitude, became a meeting point for small gestures. Evelyn showed, up with simple cakes wrapped in floral cloths. My son came by more often, and sometimes someone left an anonymous letter in the mailbox with words that made me see that, without meaning to, I'd helped others free themselves from their own silence. I, who always thought my greatest achievement was surviving, now saw that maybe my greatest courage was telling the truth, and that this gesture, small as writing on a yellowed sheet of paper, could ripple across generations. It was on a golden afternoon, one of those that make time move slower, that I sat on the porch with my old typewriter in my lap. The original letter was stored in a different envelope now, clean, firm, sealed. Beside it, others I'd started writing in recent days. Not to redeem myself, but to leave a record. Letters to my son, to Carter, to myself. Letters that didn't need to be sent. They just needed to exist. It was my way of saying I was here, with all the mistakes, all the scars, but with the late courage to take nothing important to the grave. And then, that late afternoon, Evelyn came out of the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. She sat beside me in silence. We stayed like that for a while, watching the quiet street, the birds returning home, the soft sound of the wind passing through, dry leaves. She touched my hand, as she'd done since we started seeing each other again, and said, "I never thought the Hank I knew would come back, but you did. Whole." I smiled with wet eyes, because in that moment I understood. The past didn't vanish, but now it no longer held me. It was just part of the story I finally had the courage to tell, and that's how I learned it was never too late. Not to love, not to tell the truth, not to start over, even if that start came with white hair, slow hands, and a letter that waited nearly half a century to be written. Years have passed since I last touched that typewriter, but I still remember the exact sound it made. Each keystroke a confession, each space a pause, heavy with memory. Today the house is quieter. Evelyn passed 2 winters ago, falling asleep with her hand over mine. My son keeps visiting whenever he can, and sometimes he brings my grandchildren who run across the porch, unaware that it was there I relearned to live. The letters I wrote are all stored in a simple wooden box, my name carved on the lid with a pocket knife. I asked that they be left somewhere a curious soul might find them one day, not to know me, but to remember that courage has no expiration date, that truth may take time, but it still transforms, and that sometimes all the world needs to change. A fate is a sincere letter, written with an open heart. I'm still here, slower, frailer, but at peace, not as a hero, nor as a blameless man, just as someone who at the end of life had the chance to be whole. And if there's anything worth remembering about me, let it be this. I didn't die with secrets locked in my chest. I wrote, I spoke, I loved again. And even after everything, after the war, the guilt, the time, the letter changed everything.